Chapter 1. The wooden ribs of the Sea Venture groaned like a dying beast. Deep inside the pitch-black cargo hold, 11-year-old Constance Penrose squeezed her eyes shut and gripped her 10-year-old brother's freezing hand. The air smelled of rotting oak, spilled molasses, and the suffocating tang of bilge water. Every few seconds, the merchant ship would drop like a stone, plunging the siblings into weightlessness before slamming into the trough of another massive Atlantic wave. "Constance, the water is up to my knees," Thomas cried out, his voice cracking with a terror he could no longer hide. "Hold on to me, Thomas. Don't you dare let go," Constance yelled back over the deafening roar of the storm outside. She tucked a strand of wet, dark hair behind her ear and reached out blindly in the dark, her fingers finding the coarse wool of his waistcoat. For weeks, they had been sailing from England, dreaming of the sunlit fields of Colonial Virginia, where their parents promised a new life. Now, they were trapped in the belly of a sinking wooden tomb. Above them, the ship's timbers shrieked. A sound like thunder cracked through the lower decks as the main mast snapped somewhere on the surface. The ship rolled violently to the port side, throwing Constance and Thomas against a heavy stack of wooden crates. Constance gasped as a sharp pain shot through her shoulder, but she refused to release her grip on her brother. Suddenly, an eerie, breathless silence fell over the hold. The ship stopped rolling. It hung in midair, suspended at a horrific angle. Then came the wave. A rogue wall of black Atlantic water struck the Sea Venture with the force of a cannon blast. The forward hull shattered, splintering solid oak into matchsticks. A torrent of icy white foam exploded into the dark hold, roaring like 1,000 wild beasts. The impact tore Thomas clean out of Constance's grip. "Thomas," she screamed, her lungs filling with bitter salt water as the rushing tide knocked her off her feet. She swirled helplessly in the pitch-black currents, tumbling head over heels beneath the surface. She thrashed upward, her gasping, mouth barely breaking the rising water level. "Thomas, where are you?" There was no answer. The hold was flooding completely, and the screams of the dying ship drowned out everything else. Desperate, Constance struck out into the freezing black water, praying she would find her brother before the ocean swallowed them both. Chapter 2. The icy water of the Atlantic stung Constance's face as she thrashed against the rising tide. The cargo hold was entirely submerged now, a chaotic vortex of floating barrels and splintered planks. Just as her lungs began to burn, a small hand gripped the collar of her wet linen dress. "I've got you," Thomas choked out, coughing violently. He was clinging to a floating flour barrel, his knuckles white with desperation. Before Constance could speak, a strong pair of arms hoisted her upward. A gruff ship's crewman had leaned down through the shattered hatchway, pulling both children out of the flooding belly of the ship and onto the open deck. The scene above was pure madness. The midnight sky was alive with jagged bolts of lightning, illuminating waves that towered like mountains around the Sea Venture. Rain fell in blinding sheets, sails hung in tatters, and the crew ran frantically across the slick, tilting deck. "The longboats! Lower the longboats!" Captain Penrose's voice echoed through the gale. Constance spotted her father across the deck, fighting the wheel alongside her mother, but the chaos of the storm made it impossible to reach them. "Get in, quickly!" the crewmen roared, shoving Constance and Thomas toward a small wooden lifeboat hanging from the ship's side. Thomas scrambled over the edge first, and Constance tumbled in right behind him. The small boat pitched wildly in the air as the sailor, frantically worked the ropes to lower them into the churning sea. But before the boat could touch the water, a massive rogue wave crashed directly over the deck of the Sea Venture. The impact was catastrophic. A rogue piece of flying timber struck the sailor, knocking him into the abyss. At the exact same moment, the thick hemp ropes holding the lifeboat snapped with a sound like a pistol shot. The tiny lifeboat dropped like a stone into the black ocean below. Constance and Thomas screamed as the small craft slammed into the freezing water, miraculously righting itself, but instantly taking on water. Constance scrambled to her feet, wiping the salt from her eyes, and looked back toward the merchant ship. "Mother! Father!" she shrieked. But it was too late. A thick, impenetrable wall of ocean fog rolled over the water, swallowing the Sea Venture whole. In a matter of seconds, the lights of their parent ship vanished into the dark, leaving this two young siblings entirely alone, tossing helplessly on the violent, open Atlantic. Chapter 3. The tiny lifeboat drifted for hours through the suffocating fog. The violent roaring of the open Atlantic slowly faded into a rhythmic, heavy thudding sound. Constance sat in the freezing water at the bottom of the boat, holding a shivering Thomas tight against her chest. Her limbs felt like blocks of ice, and her lips were cracked from the salt. Suddenly, the boat violently shuddered. A loud screech echoed beneath their feet. "Rocks!" Thomas yelled, his eyes widening in the dim morning light. Before Constance could react, a massive wave lifted the wooden craft and slammed it downward onto a jagged black reef. The bottom of the lifeboat split completely in two. Constance was thrown forward, her hands scraping against sharp barnacles as she hit the water. She gasped, sinking beneath the foam, but her feet instantly struck solid ground. Coughing up brine, she dragged herself upright. The water was only waist deep. Nearby, Thomas was crawling through the surf, choking but alive. Together, the siblings stumbled out of the crashing waves and collapsed onto the sand. Constance lay on her back, staring up through the thick mist. Above them loomed a desolate, eerie shoreline. Dead, gray trees with twisting, thorny branches crowded the edge of the beach like a wall of skeletal hands. The sand beneath them wasn't white, but a dark, ash-like gray. Even stranger were the wrecks. Scattered along the shoreline were the rotting ribs of ancient ships from decades past, half buried in the sand like the bones of forgotten monsters. Thomas slowly stood up, shaking out his wet waistcoat. He looked left and right, his young face pale and drawn. "Constance, where are we? Where is the Sea Venture?" Constance pushed herself up, her muscles aching with every movement. She looked out at the blank, empty horizon. There was no sign of their parents' ship. No sails, no smoke, nothing but the endless gray sea. "I don't know," Constance whispered, her voice trembling as she faced the dark, thorny jungle ahead. "But we are entirely alone." Chapter 4. The relentless heat of the tropical sun quickly burned away the morning fog, turning the island jungle into a suffocating oven. Constance and Thomas hacked their way through the dense undergrowth, their throats feeling like sandpaper. Swarms of biting black flies buzzed around their faces, drawing tiny beads of blood. "I can't go much further, Constance," Thomas gasped, wiping sweat from his forehead with his torn sleeve. "My tongue feels like leather." "Just a bit further," Constance urged, though her own knees were trembling. We must find fresh water. The salt from the sea will kill us faster than the heat. Thomas stopped, his eyes catching a cluster of thick, pitcher-shaped green plants growing near the root of a massive banyan tree. He rushed over and peered inside the largest flower. "Look, it's full of water." Constance hurried to his side. She dipped her fingers into the clear fluid and sniffed it. It smelled sweet, almost like honey. Desperate, she took a small sip. It was cool, thick, and instantly revived her parched throat. "It's safe. Drink quickly." They took turns cupping the sweet liquid into their mouths, finally feeling a surge of energy. But their relief was brutally short-lived. A sudden, unnatural silence fell over the jungle. The constant buzzing of insects stopped. The birds in the canopy fell mute. Thomas froze, his cup-shaped hands still dripping. "Constance, do you hear that?" A low, vibrating rumble echoed from the thick ferns behind them. Constance slowly turned her head. Stepping silently out of the shadows were 3 massive black wolves. Their ribs pressed hard against their mangled pelts, showing they were starving, but their piercing yellow eyes were locked entirely into the 2 children. The alpha wolf bared, its yellow fangs, a thick string of saliva dripping onto the dirt. It stepped forward, cutting off the path back to the beach. "Don't move, Thomas," Constance whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She slowly reached down, her fingers searching the ground for a heavy stick, knowing they were completely outmatched. Chapter 5. The alpha wolf lunged, its jaws snapping inches from Thomas's face. "Run!" Constance screamed, grabbing her brother by the collar of his waistcoat and yanking him backward. They broke into a frantic sprint, tearing through the jagged, thorny brush as the 3 black wolves pursued them like silent shadows. Branches tore at Constance's linen dress and sliced her arms, but the adrenaline masked the pain. Ahead, the jungle floor sloped upward into a jagged limestone cliff. Nestled near the base was a narrow, dark crevice, a cave opening just wide enough for a child. "In there. Go!" Constance pushed Thomas toward the gap. He scrambled in on his hands and knees, and Constance dove in right behind him, rolling into the pitch-black safety of the stone. Outside, the wolves slammed against the rock face, snarling and digging furiously at the narrow opening. Realizing they couldn't fit, the beasts let out a series of frustrated, blood-curdling howls that echoed through the stone walls, trapping the children inside. Breathing heavily, Thomas collapsed against the damp cave wall. "We're trapped," he whispered, his voice trembling in the dark. "Constance, what are we going to do?" "We wait," she panted, trying to calm her racing heart. "They will grow bored and leave. We just need a moment to think." Suddenly, a flame flickered to life, deep within the cavern. Constance froze. The yellow light of a small candle illuminated the damp stone walls, casting long, dancing shadows. The scent of rotting seaweed and cheap gunpowder filled the air. "Well, well, well." A raspy, gravelly voice echoed from the darkness. "What do the waves tumble into my parlor? Fresh meat." Out of the shadows stepped a terrifying figure. His clothes were ragged, salt-encrusted remnants of a pirate's coat, and his gray beard was tangled with bits of dried kelp. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and completely mad. Before the siblings could scream, the man lunged forward with shocking speed. He snatched Thomas by the collar, dragging the boy back and pressing a heavily rusted, notched cutlass directly against Thomas's throat. "Don't move, girl," the pirate roared, his yellow teeth bared in a crazed grin. "One step and the boy bleeds. I am Captain Gideon, the scourge of the Atlantic, and you two just became my ticket off this wretched rock. Now, tell me where your ship is, or neither of you leaves this cave alive." Thomas whimpered. The cold steel pressed against his skin, while Constance stood frozen, her eyes wide with horror as the candle flickered out.